Central America, the Yucatan Peninsula, 8th century AD, the height of the ancient Maya civilization. In the main temple of the city of Bonampak, a fresco is commissioned by the king priest Chan Muan. It depicts 126 figures, including nobles and warriors, dancers and musicians, women and children. It also depicts some of the more bizarre practices of an ancient culture. Warriors engage in bloody battles. The prisoners they take will be sacrificed. There are also religious rites, where sacrificial victims are part of the ceremony, their blood offered to the gods. The Bonampak murals go beyond the purely artistic. How could a culture, considered so advanced for its time, engage in such barbaric rituals? And how many cities were there like this one, where these practices were commonplace? Come with us as we search for lost cities and examine the paradoxical world of the Maya. The discovery of the Bonampak frescoes unraveled mysteries on the customs and traditions of a civilization that had developed over a period of nearly 3,000 years. A civilization that reached its height between 200 and 900 AD, and then experienced a relentless decline until it almost completely disappeared around 1500, a little before the Spanish conquistadors arrived. The cities were abandoned and slowly swallowed up by the jungle. Yet the people who once lived in them had not disappeared. They merely scattered throughout the region now known as the Yucatan Peninsula in present-day Mexico, where the ancient traditions of the Maya are still present. Archaeologist John Lloyd Stephens wrote these words in his diary on May 11, 1840, about his expedition to Mexico. In the history of the world, nothing impressed me more than the sight of this big and attractive city, now barren and lost. Stephens had set off many months earlier on the tracks of stories about cities hidden in the wild tropical jungle and a people who had mysteriously disappeared. His journey through uncharted terrain must have been difficult, with scorching temperatures and thick vegetation. And though on previous trips he had examined Egyptian pyramids, ancient monuments in Italy, and Greek temples in Athens, it was here in the jungles of Central America that he was overwhelmed by an intense feeling of astonishment. He walked out of the forest and suddenly realized that he had reached the ruins of an ancient Maya city, Palenque. Stephens and an architect, Frederick Catherwood, who painted watercolors of the area, were breathless when they saw the city's sacred grounds. It was clear that only men with ingenious minds could have planned this city, and that expert hands had built it. It was also clear that a whole new era of scholarship on an unexplored civilization would now present itself. Gods and goddesses, rulers and heroes, an entire account of hidden Maya culture and mythic history. At the time of its splendor, Palenque covered an area of over 6 square miles with a population of tens of thousands. The most important structures date from the period between 630 and 700 AD, when Kin Pakal and his son Chan Balum ruled the kingdom. The palace, the home of the royal family, was erected in the city center on a 33-foot-high platform. The palace in reality was just a group of various buildings built one against the other, but in its own way, it was an architectural masterpiece, with cellars, chambers, and rooms with rather low ceilings arranged around a courtyard. The bas-reliefs that decorate the walls are still striking today, even though many of the colors, which Stevens and Catherwood marveled about, have almost completely faded. Some glyphs, the round-figured ideograms which Maya writing is composed of, were carved into the steps of the middle court, while along the walls, stone plates were decorated with images of prisoners who must have been high-ranking officials judging from their rich garments. From the western side of the palace is a full view of the majestic Temple of the Inscriptions. In 1952, archaeologist Alberto Ruiz made an incredible discovery inside this pyramid-like structure. On the upper platform, he discovered a deep passage, a kind of tunnel that penetrated into the pyramid. The tunnel had been blocked for centuries by tons of earth and stones, so the descent into the depths of the structure was difficult and dangerous. After months of digging, Alberto Ruiz descended the entire length of the tunnel. He reached an underground room where he discovered a great sarcophagus containing the tomb of King Kin Pakal, who lived at Palenque in 700 AD. It was one of the most important. For the inhabitants of Palenque, the most important buildings in the city were those making up a group now called the Cross Group. It is composed of 3 rectangular buildings surmounted by a crest-like structure. They are temples dedicated to Maya divinities and owe their name to a mistake made by the first discoverers who mistook the symbol of the ceiba, the cosmic tree of the Maya, for the Christian cross. At the height of its splendor, this grand architecture in the middle of a dense jungle must have been a truly impressive sight. All the buildings were painted red, to the Maya, the color of life. The main temple was decorated with stuccos portraying King Pakal together with the god Kappa, protector of the ruling class. All the bas-reliefs of the buildings at Palenque prove that the cult of the gods was tied to the social class that worshippers belonged to. The god Ekchua, for instance, was the guardian of merchants. Even the colors used in pictures had to conform to precise rules. People's skin was colored red. Gods were painted in blue, the color of the sky, and animals and plants were painted yellow. Maya society was structured like a pyramid, headed by a king who had divine powers, similar to the powers of ancient Egyptian pharaohs. Below the king were the priests, nobility, and warriors. At the bottom of the pyramid was the rest of the population, mostly peasants and craftsmen. The peasants led a relatively quiet life. There were no carts on the streets, since the Maya did not know the wheel. Their city markets were small and drew only a few people. You might hear the call of turkeys and see a few buyers and sellers bargaining over various goods, but most of the inhabitants had their own fruit orchards and vegetable gardens. There were craftsmen, however, who made special objects not sold in the markets. Objects made of jade. This hard, durable, beautiful mineral was so precious that only members of the nobility were able to afford it and hire the skilled craftsmen necessary to work with it. jade objects would have been traded in one of the richest cities of the Yucatan, Chichen Itza. Chichen Itza was founded at the end of the 8th century AD and represented the consolidation of a powerful Maya state sustained by trade, tribute, and war. In the middle of town there was a great pyramid known as El Castillo, the castle, which apparently was dedicated to the worship of Kukulkan, the Maya name of the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. The 365 steps of the Castillo suggest that the building functioned as a giant chronographic marker, and on the days of the equinox, the sun casts a shadow that illuminates a serpent on the north staircase. Not surprisingly, Kukulkan's symbol was a feathered serpent. At the top, the Maya had erected a vaulted temple decorated with bas-reliefs depicting warriors. Only priests were entitled to officiate at ceremonies and appear in front of the population from the height where the temples were erected. The Temple of the Warriors served a different role, however, for it was here that the Maya engaged in sacrificial rites. In the early years of the first millennium, the Maya were thought of as peaceful timekeepers and sky watchers. But around 1000 AD, they encountered another people, the Toltecs, who imposed their culture and ruling lifestyle upon the Maya. Their influence is seen in the similarities between the buildings and sculptures at Chichen Itza and those at Tula, the Toltec capital, hundreds of miles away. One of the best examples is El Caracol, an imaginative building in the shape of a spiral whirl of a conch, an attribute of Kukulkan, whom the structure embodies. Kukulkan was identified with the planet Venus, and from tiny upper-story windows in this structure, one could observe this mythical planet. The Maya were familiar with the positions of the stars and studied their movements. In keeping track of the solar and lunar years and the cycles of visible planets, they developed a highly sophisticated long-count calendar that dated back to August 13th, 3114 BC. The influence of the Toltecs is also seen in the comparison of stone sculptures from Tula called Chacmul with the one at the Temple of the Warriors at Chichen Itza. Under the influence of the Toltecs, the old system of government was eradicated. Warrior kings replaced more benign monarchs and priests. And the practice of human sacrifice was introduced. An example of this is seen in the Chacmul at the top of the stairway of the Temple of the Warriors. A reclining statue is faced toward El Castillo, holding a bowl in his hand. It is here where they put the hearts torn out of the chests of sacrificial victims. Sports and ball playing were part of daily life at Chichen Itza, except there was a lot more riding on the outcomes than prizes or trophies. They played a game called pelota, and the ball court at Chichen Itza was the largest in Central America, 560 feet long and 165 feet wide. The object of the game, which was more a religious rite than recreational, was to throw a rubber ball into a stone hoop. What made the task hard was the fact that players couldn't use their hands or feet. They had to use their hips or elbows to move the ball. A bas-relief shows two teams competing against each other, but this bas-relief shows the bloody outcome. A player who was defeated is being decapitated, the fate of players from the losing side. A long platform bears depictions of skulls, presumably the skulls of the losers. But according to some scholars, winners as well might have been beheaded. It was considered an honor, having won, to go to a heaven of warriors. The practice of human sacrifice was described by Bishop Diego de Landa, a Spaniard who lived in the 16th century. He himself was guilty of committing a number of crimes while attempting to convert the inhabitants to Christianity. Among these, the so-called auto da fe, or public burning of Mani, in which all written documents from this classical period of the Maya were destroyed by fire. The Maya were the first people of the New World to keep historical records, with a written history that begins in 50 BC. But today, only 4 of thousands of books written in hieroglyphs still exist, one of which is the so-called Dresden Codex. Maya books were made of fig tree bark folded like an accordion. Although everyone could learn how to write, only priests were allowed to compile books and read sacred scriptures. The greatest difficulty in deciphering Maya writing lies in interpreting the glyphs, since they are based on a system that combines ideograph and phonetic elements. It's a complicated system that was finally unraveled by Russian epigraphist Yuri Norosev, who wrote the first Mayan grammar that was published in 1950. The territory inhabited by the Maya was vast, and since horses and donkeys had become extinct on the continent tens of thousands of years earlier, to make foot travel easier, the Maya built roads. Actually, an entire road system that linked key cities to places of pilgrimage. Uxmal was one of the most important places of worship of Maya civilization, and reached its peak between the 8th and 11th centuries AD. Uxmal was the administrative and religious capital of the Maya, who lived in the hilly zone of Puuc, a name also used for the region's peculiar architectural style. The finest example of Puuc style is the governor's palace, nearly 330 feet long, probably the seat of the authorities. The building has a cornice decorated with masks portraying the god Chak. It was originally entirely colored like all Maya buildings, and the elaborate renderings of gods and symbols attest to the wide range of Maya interests. However, the most majestic monument at Uxmal was the pyramid, or Temple of the Magician. It was erected primarily to worship the gods of heaven, but it too served as an observatory to study the movements of celestial bodies. Like the governor's palace, the pyramid was decorated with representations of the mask of the god Chak. This sculpture, portraying the tattooed face of a priest coming out of a serpent's mouth, was discovered inside the pyramid. The buildings at Uxmal exhibit the high level of perfection reached by Maya stone carvers. Not all Maya settlements were situated in the middle of the jungle. Fortified cities were also erected by the sea to make the coast safer. One of these places, built by the Caribbean Sea, was Tulum. This was the site of the first meeting in 1518 of the Maya and the Spanish who arrived by sea. The conquistadors had to be amazed to see such a formidable city in this beautiful natural setting. In the Temple of the Frescoes are some of the most awe-inspiring Maya paintings that have stood the test of time. There are illustrations of the gods of the Maya pantheon that dominated the universe of the living as well as of the dead. The drawings evidence a culture that was sensitive to the importance of color. When Captain Juan de Grijalva landed for the first time on the shore of Tulum, he thought it looked as big as Seville in his native Spain. He would have seen buildings painted in vermilion red, light blue, white, and bright green. Unfortunately, only a few traces of these colors remain today. The castle, or El Castillo, of Tulum is certainly the most important monument of this city. It was partly destroyed in the early 20th century and was restored based upon the illustration Catherwood made of it when he arrived in Tulum. No one was sure of the function of El Castillo until Michael Kramer, an archaeologist of the National Geographic Society, reached the conclusion that it was a lighthouse used for navigation. In fact, not very far from Tulum is the island of Cozumel, which in Mayan language means place of the swallows. In ancient times, there were many vessels that sailed back and forth between the island and the mainland. The sailors of these boats probably relied on the help of lighthouses like the one at Tulum to get their bearings. The Maya enjoyed a civilization and a culture that is a study in contrasts. They had respect for nature and considered animals sacred, and yet the animal called human was expendable in sacrifice. Blood was the mortar of Maya life. They were great historians and builders, and yet it never came to them that the wheel could be used as a means of transport. They were superstitious and feared thunder and lightning, but studied and predicted astrophenomena with modern precision. The contradictions of the Maya represent their greatest mystery. What we do know is that they spent their time in unison with the forces of the universe. Poet Miguel Ángel Asturias wrote, "The Maya were a people who counted their days like diamonds. They had faith in their gods, in their smoke rites, in dreams, and in the wisdom of words, things that 5 centuries of devastation, exploitation, and oblivion could not destroy. The Maya live on, thanks to what they have left for our civilization to discover."